Thus a long time passed. I took no regular account of the weeks, but perhaps as many as 14 or 15 may have gone by in this manner. I devoted at first every day, then about 4 days, and at last not more than 1 or 2 days in each week, to the prosecution of my apparently hopeless search. At last I found that I had explored all that part of the island which lay immediately round about my cavern for a distance of at least 12 miles in all directions. I could now do no more, unless I shifted the centre of my observations, or undertook a regular tour of the coast. After some deliberation I decided upon the latter course, and, having furnished myself with a flask of brandy, a blanket tightly strapped up like a soldier's knapsack, a hatchet, cutlass, compass, telescope, tinder-box, and staff, started one morning upon my journey. It was now, as nearly as I could judge, about the first week in April, and the weather was enchantingly beautiful. My route, for the first day, lay along the same path that I had already trodden once or twice, up the north side of the great bay. When I wanted food, I gathered some coconuts from the adjacent woods, and at night I slept in a cavern very much like the one which I now called my home. The next day I pursued the same direction, and provided myself with food and shelter after the same fashion. On the third day I came to a point where the cliffs receded from the seaboard, and a broad tract of grassland came down almost to the verge of the beach. I was now obliged to have recourse to shellfish and such berries as I could find, for my daily food. This made me somewhat anxious for the future, for I foresaw that if the palm forests were to fail me for many days together, I should be obliged to give up my design, and return home with my doubts yet unresolved. However, I made up my mind to persevere as long as possible, and having walked till nearly nightfall, supped on such fare as I could pick up from the beach and the bushes, and slept in the open air, with only the deep grass for my couch and the stars for my canopy. On the fourth day I pursued the same course, with the savannah still bordering the shore, and on the fifth had the satisfaction of finding the palms and some other trees, again fringing the beach, sometimes in clumps or plantations, sometimes scattered here and there on rising knolls, like the trees in a well-arranged English park. Among these, to my great joy and refreshment, I found several fine bread trees and some wild sugar canes, and, towards afternoon, came upon a delicious spring of fresh water, which bubbled up from the midst of a natural reservoir, and flowed away among the deep grasses in a little channel almost hidden by flowers and wild plants. In this charming spot I determined to stay for the remainder of the day, for I was weary and in need of repose. So I lay down beside the spring, feasted on breadfruit and sugar-cane juice, bathed my face and hands in the cool spring, and enjoyed some hours of delicious rest. At nightfall I crept into a little nook amid a clump of spreading trees, and slept profoundly. The next morning I awoke, as usual, with the sunrise. I had been thinking the evening before that this would be the pleasantest spot in which to pitch my tent for the summer, should nothing more hopeful turn up, and I now resolved, before resuming my journey, to reconnoitre the little oasis, and fix upon some site where I might command a good view of the sea, and yet enjoy the benefits of the trees and the grass. A green hill, surmounted by a crown of palms and other trees, and lying about 1/2 mile from the waterline, looked as if it might exactly present the advantages I sought. I went up to it in the clear, cool air of the early morning, brushing the dew from the grass as I strode along, and feeling quite reinvigorated by my night's rest. As I mounted the little hill, a new prospect began opening before me, and I saw, what I had not suspected while on the level below, that the savannah was surrounded on 3 sides by the sea, and that by crossing it in a direct line, I should save some miles of coasting. A little reflection led me, consequently, to the conclusion that I had now reached the most northerly part of the island, according to the chart, and that from the summit of the hill I should probably come in sight of the smaller island. Absorbed in these thoughts, I reached the top almost before I was aware of it, and was proceeding to make my way through the trees in search of the view on the other side, when something close by, reared against the stems of 3 palms which grew near together in a little angle, attracted my attention. I advanced, hesitated, rushed forward. My eyes had not deceived me. It was a hut. At first I was so agitated that I had to lean against a tree for support. When I had somewhat recovered my composure, and came to examine the outside of the hut with attention, I saw that it was utterly dilapidated, and bore every mark of having been deserted for a long time. The sides were made of wattled twigs and clay, and the roof, which had partly fallen in, of canes, palm leaves, and interwoven branches. On the turf outside were the remains of a blackened circle, as if large fires had been kindled there, and in the midst of the circle lay some smooth stones, which might have once served the purposes of an oven. Close by, at the foot of a large bread tree, about halfway between the hut and the spot where I was standing, rose 2 grassy mounds of about 6 feet each in length and 2 feet in width. Just such mounds as may be seen in the corner appropriated to the poor in any English country churchyard. At the sight of these graves, for graves I felt they were, my heart sank within me. I went up to the low arch which served as an entrance to the hut. It was partially closed from the inside by a couple of rotten planks. I removed the planks with a trembling hand, and looked within. All was dark and damp, save where a portion of the roof had fallen in, and hidden the ground beneath. Feverishly, desperately, I began to tear away the wattled walls. I felt that I must penetrate the secret of the place. I knew as surely as if the hand of God himself had written it on the earth and sky, that my poor sailors had here found their last resting places. O heavens! How shall I describe the scene that met my eyes when I had torn the frail fence from its foundations, and lifted away the roof, that had fallen as if on purpose to hide that melancholy scene from the very stars and sun, a bed of dead leaves and mosses, a human skeleton yet clothed in a few blackened rags, 3 rusty muskets, a few tin cups, and knives, and such poor necessaries, all thickly coated with red dust, some cocoa shells, a couple of hatchets, a bottle corked and tied over at the mouth, as sailors prepare records for committal to the sea. These were the relics that I found, and the sight of them smote me with a terrible, unutterable conviction of misfortune. I seized the bottle, staggered away to a distance of some yards from the fatal spot, broke it against the bark of the nearest tree, and found, as I had expected, a written paper inside. For some minutes I had not courage to read it. When at last my eyes were less dim and my hand steadier, I deciphered the following words: August 30th, 1761. I, Aaron Taylor, mate of the schooner Mary Jane, write these words. Our captain, William Barlow, left the vessel in the small boat, accompanied by Joshua Dunn, seaman, 2 hours after daybreak on the 24th of December last, A.D. 1760. The weather was foggy, and the ship lay to within hearing of breakers. The captain left me in charge of the vessel, with directions to anchor in the bay off which we then lay, and left orders that we were to send an exploring party ashore in case he did not return by the evening of the 4th day. In the course of the 25th, Christmas Day, the fog cleared off, and we found ourselves lying just off the curve of the bay, as our captain had stated. We then anchored according to instructions. The 4 days went by, and neither the captain nor Joshua Dunn returned. Neither did we see any signs of the boat along that part of the shore against which we lay at anchor. The 2 seamen who yet remained on board were then dispatched by me in the longboat to search along the east coast of the island, but they returned at the end of 3 days without having seen any traces of the captain, the sailor, or the small boat. One of these men, named James Gray, and myself, started again at the end of a few more days of waiting. I left John Cartwright in charge of the vessel, with orders to keep a strict lookout along shore for the captain or Dunn. We landed, hauled our boat up high and dry, and made for the interior of the country, which consisted apparently of nothing but dense forest, in which we wandered for 5 days without success. Returning in a southeast direction from the northward part of the forestland, James Gray fell ill with fever, and was unable to get back so far as the boat. I left him on a high spot of ground sheltered by trees, made him a bed of leaves and moss, and went back to the ship for help. When I reached the Mary Jane, I found John Cartwright also sick with fever, though less ill than Gray. He was able to help in bringing along blankets and other necessaries, and he and I built up this hut together, and laid our dying messmate in it. On the 2nd day from this, Cartwright, who had over-exerted himself while he was already ailing of the same disease, became so much worse that he, too, was unable to get back to the ship, or to do anything but lie down in the hut beside Gray. I did all I could for them, and tried to do my duty by the ship as well as by the men. I went down to the shore every evening to look after the schooner, and went on board every morning, and I nursed the poor fellows as well as I could, by keeping up fires just outside the hut, and supplying them with warm food, warm drinks, and well-aired blankets. It was not for me to save them, however. They both died before a fortnight was gone by. James Gray first, and Cartwright a few hours after. I buried them both close against the hut, and returned to the ship, not knowing what better to do, but having very little hope left of ever seeing Captain Barlow or Joshua Dunn in this world again. I was now quite alone, and, as I believed, the last survivor of all the crew. I felt it my duty to remain by the ship, and at anchor in the same spot, till every chance of the captain's return should have gone by. I made up my mind, in short, to stay till the 25th of March, namely 3 months from the time when Captain Barlow left the vessel, and then to navigate her into the nearest port. Long before that, however, I began to feel myself ailing. I doctored myself from the captain's medicine chest, but the drugs only seemed to make me worse instead of better. I was not taken, however, exactly as Gray and Cartwright were. They fell ill and broke down suddenly. I ailed, and lingered, got better and worse, and dragged on a weary, sickly life from week to week and from month to month, till not only the 3 months had gone, but 3 more to the back of them, and yet I had no strength or power to stir from the spot. I was so weak that I could not have weighed anchor to save my life, and so thin that I could count every bone under my skin. At length, on the night of the 18th of June, there came a tremendous hurricane, which tore the schooner from her moorings, and drove her upon the shore, high and dry, about 100 yards above the usual high-water mark. I thought she would have been dashed to pieces, and was almost glad to think I should now be rid of my miserable life, and die in the sea at last. But it was God's will that I should not end so. The ship was stranded, and I with her. I now saw my fate before me. I was doomed, anyhow, to live or die on the island. If I recovered, I could never get the Mary Jane to sea again, but must spend all my years alone on the cursed island. This was my bitterest grief. I think it has broken my heart. Since I have been cast ashore, I have grown more and more sickly, and now that I feel I have not many more days to live, I write this narrative of all that has happened since Captain Barlow left the ship, in the hope that it may some day fall into the hands of some Christian seaman who will communicate its contents to my mother and sisters at Bristol. I have been living up at the hut of late, since the heat set in, and have written this in sight of my messmates' graves. When I have sealed it in a bottle, I shall try to carry it down to the shore, and either leave it on board the Mary Jane, or trust it to the waves. I should like my mother to have my gold watch, and I give her my dog Peter, whom I left at home, to my cousin Ellen. If any kind Christian finds this paper, I pray him to bury my bones. God forgive me all my sins. Amen. Aaron Taylor. August 30th, 1761. I will not try to describe what I felt on reading this simple and straightforward narrative, or with what bitter remorse and helpless wonder I looked back upon the evil my obstinacy had wrought. But for me, and my insatiate thirst for wealth, these men would now have been living and happy. I felt as if I had been their murderer, and raved and wept miserably as I dug a 3rd trench, and laid in it the remains of my brave and honest mate. Besides all this, there was a heavy mystery hanging upon me, which I tried to fathom, and could not comprehend. Taylor's narrative was dated just 8 months after I left the ship, and to me it seemed that scarcely 3 had gone by. Nor was that all. His body had had time to decay to a mere skeleton. The ship had had time to become a mere wreck. My own head had had time to grow grey. What had happened to me? I asked myself that weary question again and again and again, till my head and my heart ached, and I could only kneel down and pray to God that my wits were not taken from me. I found the watch with difficulty, and taking it and the paper with me, went back, sadly and wearily, to my cavern by the sea. I had now no hope or object left but to escape from the island if I could, and this thought haunted me all the way home, and possessed me day and night. For more than a week I deliberated as to what means were best for my purpose, and hesitated whether to build me a raft of the ship's timbers, or try to fit the longboat for sea. I decided at last upon the latter. I spent many weeks in piecing, caulking, and trimming her to the best of my ability, and thought myself quite a skilful ship's carpenter when I had fitted her with a mast and a sail and a new rudder, and got her ready for the voyage. This done, I hauled her down, with infinite labour and difficulty, as far as the tide mark on the beach, ballasted her with provisions and fresh water, shoved her off at high tide, and put to sea. So eager was I to escape that I had all but forgotten my bundle of jewels, and had to run for them at the last moment, at the risk of seeing my boat floated off before I could get back. As to venturing once again to the City of Treasures, it had never crossed my mind for an instant since the morning when I came down through the palm forests and found the Mary Jane a ruin on the beach. Nothing would now have induced me to return there. I believed the place to be accursed, and could not think of it without a shudder. As for the captain of the Adventure, I believed him to be the evil one in person, and his store of gold an infernal bait to lure men to destruction. I believed it then, and I believe it now, solemnly. The rest of my story may be told very briefly. After running before the wind for 11 days and nights in a northeasterly direction, I was picked up by a Plymouth merchantman about 45 miles west of Merignana. The captain and crew treated me with kindness, but evidently looked upon me as a harmless madman. No one believed my story. When I described the islands, they laughed. When I opened my store of jewels, they shook their heads and gravely assured me that they were only lumps of spar and sandstone. When I described the condition of my ship and related the misfortunes of my crew, they told me the schooner Mary Jane had been lost at sea 20 years ago, with every hand on board. Unfortunately, I found that I had left my mate's narrative behind me in the cavern, or perhaps my story would have found more credit. When I swore that to me it seemed less than 6 months since I had put off in the small boat with Joshua Dunn, and was capsized among the breakers, they brought the ship's log to prove that instead of its being the 25th of December A.D. 1760, when I came back to the beach and saw the Mary Jane lying high and dry between the rocks, it must have been nearer the 25th of December 1780, the 20th Christmas, namely, of the glorious and happy reign of our most gracious sovereign, King George III. Was this true? I know not. Everyone says so, but I cannot bring myself to believe that 20 years could have passed over my head like one long summer day. Yet the world is strangely changed, and I with it, and the mystery is still unexplained as ever to my bewildered brain. I went back to England with the merchantman, and to my native place among the Mendip Hills. My mother had been dead 12 years. Bessie Robinson was married, and the mother of 4 children. My youngest brother was gone to America, and my old friends had all forgotten me. I came among them like a ghost, and for a long time they could hardly believe that I was indeed the same William Barlow who had sailed away in the Mary Jane, young and full of hope, 20 years before. Since my return home, I have tried to sell my jewels again and again, but in vain. No merchant will buy them. I have sent charts of the Treasure Isles over and over again to the Board of Admiralty, but receive no replies to my letters. My dream of wealth has faded year by year, with my strength and my hopes. I am poor, and I am declining into old age. Everyone is kind to me, but their kindness is mixed with pity, and I feel strange and bewildered at times, not knowing what to think of the past, and seeing nothing to live for in the future. Kind people who read this true statement, pray for me. Signed, William Barlow, discoverer of the Treasure Isles, and formerly captain of the schooner Mary Jane. FINIS. That is the end of the discovery of the Treasure Isles by Amelia Edwards.